So today's Women Take Over the Capitol event. What are you and other organizers hoping for an outcome from today's action?
Sure. Today's event is kind of cool in that it's a little bit different than some of the rally days we've done down here before. In terms of, it's a little more organic. So what we did is Women's Power Assembly, Million Mothers, and a couple of other organizations got together and said we're going to go down to the Capitol and we want to talk to women in general. There's so many issues facing women, not just reproductive rights, but kind of across the board. And so they called a bunch of organizations, said who wants to come, who wants to bring your representatives. Let's do a small rally from like 11 to noon, and then we're going to do lobby training from noon to 12:30, and then send everybody off on their own into their own legislators' offices to talk about the issues that are most important to them. So there's actually going to be sort of a bombardment of elected officials in the state hearing from, everything about crime, poverty, labor, reproductive justice, the whole kind of gamut today, with the idea of really trying to get across the point that this is not a single issue problem. Even though we keep talking about it as the war on women and it's women's issues, our legislators need to understand that women's issues are more than abortion rights, or more than access to birth control. They cover the broad gamut of women's experience, and so with the hope that if we put everybody kind of in a line going through the the legislators' offices, by the end of the day they'll start to get a little bit more cohesive picture of exactly what we've been doing.
I mean, it seems that the short-term strategy is to affect the November election.
Yes.
But regardless of the outcome, I mean, obviously if the folks who are wanting to pass this anti-choice, anti-women legislation are voted out, that would be considered to be obviously a victory. But what are people already talking about sort of strategy beyond that day, regardless of the outcome, in terms of what else do we do that's outside of the realm of electoral politics?
Yeah, I think so. I think there are really two, I guess in my opinion, I won't speak to the larger strategy of all of the other organizations, but the two things that I've sort of seen coming out of this entire thing is, one, a lot of coalition building, so a lot of work and partnership between organizations that have not had a lot of contact with each other in the past, really crossing issue lines in a way that we haven't before, which hopefully, I mean, if it works and it continues, creates a situation where we have way more voices and way more influence permanently, not just between now and November, but whoever gets elected into office after November knows that we influence them getting there and influence those who are no longer there, and so hopefully will take us all a little bit more seriously in the future. The other thing that I see happening out of it is the idea that for really the first time in Michigan in a really long time, the concept that women's voice is truly influential, not just the organizations but individual women are actually an influential part of the political process and will continue to be, is sort of a little bit of a paradigm shift for how our legislature has worked in the past. And so hopefully we can continue to use that voice long term to make sure that we stay a driving force behind politics, and not only politically but also sort of socioculturally across the state. So really making sure that we're using that coalition power and using that sort of combined power of women's voices to continue to push the conversation forward outside of the Capitol as well, so in our own communities and towns and cities.
Sure. Last thing is maybe just, as someone who works for Planned Parenthood, can you try to just put a human face on this so that, I mean, obviously there's a lot of, political rhetoric that's being used, and that's obviously very important, but what does this mean on the ground on a daily basis? How does these kind of things, impact women, in the real world?
I could throw a lot of statistics at you and I could throw a lot of personal stories at you, but when it comes right down to it, basically what it does is it does two things. One, it directly cuts access to services that women not only need, but quite frankly deserve. I mean, it makes it more difficult every time there's a budget cut, every time there's a funding cut, every time there's legislation that increases unnecessarily restrictions on how places like Planned Parenthood and other health clinics and abortion providers can operate. It alters our ability to provide the services that we're providing to women who are walking in our doors every day. coming from a public affairs standpoint, I'm on the political side of it most of the time. But when I go over across the hall to my health center and I talk to my health center workers, I can talk about how exhausted I am, and I can talk about how this is so frustrating and I'm so tired of hearing this political rhetoric. But I walk into their offices and they're emotionally exhausted from having to turn away somebody for a procedure that they needed because we ran out of funding that month, or having to explain to very young women that their birth control is no longer free because we got our funding cut, and so now we have to charge $15 or $20 a month. Those moments I think are very difficult, and I think for legislators and even for those of us staff who work on the political side, I very rarely actually ever have to implement the laws that are happening. So try to imagine sitting in a situation, you've got a young woman, she's sitting in front of you, she's frightened, she's not sure, who knows she's there, or if she should tell her, her family that she's there, she may be sexually active for the first time, and now you have to tell her that she has to pay for birth control she can't afford, or she can't get an IUD because we don't have any more available that month, and she's going to have to wait a month or 2 months or 3 months on a waiting list. So that's sort of the biggest level of impact. The second part of it is that as these laws become normative and as these attacks become normative, it creates a social climate where women seeking those services are socially penalized. And I think that for me is almost a little bit harder, is the fact that they're not even coming to our door to begin with. They're going, no, I'm not going to go in there, they've got picketers, or no, I'm not going to try to get birth control anymore because I know my boss and I know he's going to fire me if I try to get it. And that to me feels like defeat, and that's a little bit terrifying, that we're not that we just can't access, but that we're giving up even trying to access the things that even just a couple of years ago were totally normal, accessible procedures.
Hello, how are you doing today?